we're going to be making one of these pull jumping jack style toys. I've made a toad, okay? But I don't want you to be limited to just making what I make. You can make lots of other things. I made another one just to show you kind of something a bit silly. I made a strong man puppet like this. So you can make a human form as well if you'd like. I just thought it'd be quite fun to make a toad. So, Victorian jumping jacks. I don't know if anyone's seen these before. They're quite a popular toy, and they were very, very popular in the 18th and 19th century. They're a kind of cross between a paper toy and a marionette, which is a string puppet. So it's a bit of a cheat because it's not a full puppet this week, but I think they're really, really fantastic, and they're really easy things to create at home. And as you can see, there's quite a variation of them there. They used to be called pantins. They were very, very popular in France, and they used to kind of be made in courts as kind of little kind of toys that children would make. And they used to be made out of wood, like the one on the left over here. And then they became more popular to be created as a kind of kit that you could make at home, like these. So people would buy them from shops, cut them out themselves, and then make them as a little mechanical toy. And it's said that they're one of the oldest toys in the world as well, because they were actually found in ancient Egyptian tombs, which is fantastic. There's an ancient Egyptian word for puppeteer, which is neurospastor, which translates as string puller. So actually puppets have been around for a really, really long time. They're a really simple design. This is what they should look like from the back. So really we're going to be creating some hinged joints today that we're going to attach strings onto to create movement that we can control from below, pulling our string. And once you've got a grasp of that kind of most simple design, you can really play around with it, because actually people have created a more complex version of these toys, like this guy here. I don't have a video of it moving, but when the string is pulled, he sort of scrubs himself in the bath. So you kind of move into it being a bit more like an automaton, where you can control movement using different gears and levers. So I hope that it inspires you today. And before we begin as well, I wanted to share with you something that I thought was quite fantastic about these toys. They used to be known as quokka-wodgers, which is one of the best words I've heard, a quokka-wodger. And it's been adopted in a political way to mean someone who's controlled without their will. So maybe if you adopt any word for the rest of the day, you can adopt quokka-wodger. So before we begin, I should let you know what we're going to be needing today. Again, we're just going to be working with simple materials that you can find around the house. So you will need some cardboard. You will need a pair of scissors. You will need a pen. You will need some string. Again, I've just got the really simple garden twine. I've swapped over to green today because we're making a toad. The other thing you're going to need is something to make the holes with. I usually use a bamboo skewer, but again, you can just use a pin, and something to push that bamboo into, so a little piece of blue tack or rubber. And the last two things you're going to need are a candle. I'm just using a little tea light and a lighter. And we'll get to why we'll use that a bit later. So I'll show you how to make this today, but the principle of what I'm going to show you could apply to any design at all. And I'd encourage you to think about something you might want to make that might be a little bit different. You don't have to make a toad, you can make a human form, you can make something a bit fantastical. And we're going to start by drawing the outline of our toad's body. So I'm going to start off by drawing my toad. Now, again, size of the puppet doesn't really matter. I decided to make mine a little bit smaller, but you can really make yours as large as you want to. We want to start off by creating our toad's body. So I'm going to start off by having a nice big round body here like that, and then a kind of toad head shape. Something like this. So you end up with a kind of toad's body shape, roughly like that. The second thing we're going to draw is our toad's arm. Now, we want to make sure that our arm is able to reach out from the body like this. And we want to make sure he's got lovely toady, froggy hands, something like that. Okay. Just a rough example. Now I'm only going to draw one because I'm going to cut this out and then I'm going to flip it over so that I've got exactly the same shape in a mirrored form. Okay, so the next thing I'm now going to do is just cut these two pieces out. So you end up with a shape a bit like this. Okay, and now the next thing I'm going to do is cut out my toad's arm, and I'm going to use this as a template to draw around so that I have the flipped version of the arm. So I have two exactly the same shape. So I've cut out my arm, and you can see, if I hold this up now, roughly how that's going to look on my puppet. I'm going to now use this arm as a template to draw around. So I'm going to make sure I flip it over so that I've got this blank side of the card. And instead of using my thick pen, I'm going to use a pencil so I get a better, clearer outline. Okay. So now I've drawn out on that, I'm going to cut that one out as well. The really nice thing about this design, as I'm cutting out this arm, is that you can see how it's quite an easy thing to cut out, and immediately you can start to see how my toad is kind of coming together. There's his arms there. We can see already that if I make these move, they're going to move not dissimilarly to the puppet I showed you at the beginning. So we've got our arms, we've got our body, now we need our legs. And as you can see with the puppet, if I show you again, the legs are in 3 parts. You've got an upper leg, you've got your lower leg, and you've got your foot. So we're going to draw those parts separately. And just as we've done with our arm, I'm going to draw only one side, and then I'm going to use that as my template so that we have exactly the same shaped legs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm using my body to ensure that I've actually got the right size kind of legs there. So I'm putting my body on the card, and then I'm using that as a kind of guide to make sure that they're not too massive and they're not too small. So I think that kind of looks about right. So I'll just finish that shape off there like that. Then I can use this to guide the middle section of the leg, the lower leg, because I don't want it to be as big as that. So I'll just make that a little bit smaller, like this. And then as it's a toad, I want his feet to be nice and big, and they're webbed obviously as well. And this is really quite a crude version of one. You could be, you know, if you're an excellent artist and you can draw really, really well, you might decide to do something a little bit more detailed here, and that's just great. So now that I've got my leg in 3 parts, I'm going to cut these 3 sections out, and I'm going to use them and just flip them over so that I've got exactly the same shape on the other side. If you're confident drawing, then you can always just draw each section twice, you know. But it's a really nice way to ensure that if you've got a more complicated shape, for example, if you've decided to make a puppet that isn't a toad, if you want to do something like a human and you've spent a while drawing the kind of musculature of something, that you really do get the exact same shape. Okay, so now you can see that if I was to put these together, I'm laying one on top of the other like this, you can see that I've got my frog's leg, just like that. So we're going to flip that now. I'm going to draw it on the other side, and I'm going to make sure that I've got 2 legs that are exactly the same. I'm going to use my pencil to make sure I've got a nice clean line. Upper leg. Lower leg. And there's my foot. And once again, I'm just going to cut these 3 pieces out. Now that I've managed to cut both of these sections out, I'm able to just have a look and make sure that they're nice and even, make sure that I can like trim any bits so that they don't look mismatched, and that one side isn't massively big, you know. It's just a nice chance to neaten up any of this, just like that. But then you have basically got all of the parts of your puppet. So if I lay this out to show you now, here we go. There's my body, there's my arms, and here are my legs. Just like this. So you can see we've now got all of the parts of our puppet. The next thing is that obviously we need to attach the limbs to the body so that we have what's essentially our puppet. But we need to think quite carefully about how we're going to attach them on, because if I go back to showing you the backside of our frog here, you can see that I've attached the body on. There's our pivot point for our leg, but I need to think about leaving enough space at the top of each limb to attach on the string that allows us to actually move the limbs together like this. And it's quite important that they're in the right position, because if we move them to the wrong side, then it doesn't actually like to move properly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back and have a look, and we're going to make a mark using a pen where we want to put attach the limbs together to create the pivot point. I can see that I want to attach my my frog roughly here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use a little biro, and you can kind of check and see that it's got the correct movement just by pushing a biro in and seeing that that's right. See what I'm doing there? So I'm able to just kind of move and see where I want the arm to go. And once I'm happy with that, I can push a little bit harder. And what it will do is make a mark in the puppet. So I know exactly where I want to attach my arm on. And then I can do the same on the other side and make sure that it's nice and even on this side. So I'm going to push that there. I can see that it's on an even. I'm going to push through to make a mark. And then I know that my arms are in the right position. And I'm going to do the same on the legs, but I'm going to start off with doing each leg at a time. So I'm going to take my first leg, and I'm going to have a look at where I want the leg to attach on. So I can see that that's a nice movement there. And I'm going to use my pen to make a mark. And I'm going to push through so that I know where I want it to attach on to the other side. So you can see there, I'm just using a sharp biro. You can use a pencil as well, or you can even use a pin. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the foot. I'm going to lay the foot over the top like this. I'm going to make sure that my hole isn't too close to the edge. Now, obviously, when you're working with cardboard, it can rip. If you do manage to make a hole or you rip your cardboard, don't worry at all. We can just use some tape and cover it up. But do try and make sure that your holes are slightly in from the edge. So I'm going to lay that over the top, and I'm going to make a mark. So I can now see that I've got marks where I want to make holes in my leg. I'm going to do the same on the other leg as well. So we'll start with the kind of knee joint here. I can see that's where I want it to pivot. Great. And then I'm going to do the same thing here as well. And once I'm happy with where I've made my marks, I'm able to take my bamboo skewer, and I'm going to take my blue tack, put it on the mat there, and I'm going to make my holes nice and carefully with my sharp object. Okay, that's one leg done, and I'm on to the second leg. These bamboo skewers are really easy to get hold of. You can get a packet of them at the supermarket. They're the kind of things that you use for barbecues. But if you don't have access to get a bamboo skewer, as I've said, then normally just a really sharp pencil will do, or a pin from the board, just something like that. It also depends on the type of card you're using. I'm using corrugated card today, so it's relatively easy to make holes in. Okay. So once you finish doing that, you should have your legs completely with holes in each side. And that means we're able now to attach our legs together. So I'm going to be using some string now to tie my legs together. So let's start with the upper leg to the lower leg. Now my garden string tends to fray a little bit at the edges. So when I'm posting it through a hole, I just make sure I can twist it so that it goes through nice and easily. You might have a better string than I do. Okay. So I've now tied my string through my leg here, and I'm going to make sure I tie a knot either side nice and tight to stop it from moving and coming apart. So there's first knot on one side, and then I'm going to tie the other knot really tight on the other side. You want to make sure you're allowing enough space for there to be movement in our legs, because our puppet's going to be operated by gravity. So we want to make sure it's loose enough that it's going to be actually able to move. So I'll just check that. There we go. So you can now see that we've got our moving knee. And then I'm going to attach on the foot next. So again, working through that hole, attaching on my froggy foot, on my toadie's foot. Like so, and just the same again, I'm now going to tie the knots either side to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, and once I'm happy that I've got my leg all together, you can now see that I've got a frog's leg. I can trim the string either side, but not too small, because you want to make sure that you've got enough string in case it comes undone again. So I'm just going to trim it down on either side here and on the bottom here. That's your first little frog leg. So now we're going to repeat this process on the other side. We're going to tie those again. So I'll put that leg to one side, and let's attach these through. And that means you've now got 2 frog's legs. So let's just get those the right way around to show you. There we are. Okay, so now we've got our frog's legs. Fantastic. So the first thing I'm going to do before I attach these legs on is that I'm going to go back to where I marked my arms earlier, and I'm going to make sure that I've got a hole big enough to get the string through. Here and here. Okay. And I'm going to make a hole into the body where the arms are going to attach on. See? That's that corrugated cardboard. Do be careful when you're making the holes with the sharp objects there. So I've got my arms and I've got my legs. There we go. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to attach or make a mark where I want my legs to attach. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my biro and I'm just going to play around with by puncturing a little hole in the top of the leg there where I think I want my pivot point to be. I'm going to play around with where I want the legs to sit. And on my frog, what I've made sure is that when he's at rest as such, his legs up like this, I'm looking to make sure that he looks like he's kind of sitting like a little frog like that. So that's what I'm aiming for. I'm just making sure that you can't really see too much over the edge, and that when he's moving, he's going to have full extension with his legs. And at the back there, I'm making sure that the legs aren't touching in the middle at all. We want to make sure that there's a little bit of a gap, and that's so that our string has a chance to actually pull and make the rotation to make sure that these two things can move together here. So that's what I'm looking at now. I'm making sure that there's enough room on my frog for his leg to move like this. And I'm doing the same on the other side and making sure that when my puppet is moving, those legs aren't going to hit in the middle like that. There's enough room for us to attach that on. So once you've marked that, okay, it's tempting to actually attach these just straight on, but obviously what we need to make sure is that there is also a hole for the string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit my puppet into a sort of resting position where it's going to sit when I'm not putting any tension onto the string. So if it was hanging on the wall like that, that's how my puppet's going to look. So I want to make sure that I'm allowing my puppet to sit like that. So I'm going to make the legs move down to that point. And the reason I'm going to do that is that obviously what we want to make sure is that our string is attached at a point, which means that when you pull it, those legs are able to move. So I'm having a look at where my legs fall, and I'm going to make a little mark at the top of the leg on each side in a parallel line. So just to show you, it's just above where I'm going to be attaching the leg on with this hole. I'm making sure that the legs are down, and you can see that those two top holes are in a kind of like even position on each leg, okay? So we've done that with the top of the legs. We've made sure we've got a little hole there, and we're going to do the same thing with the arms as well, just to make sure that we know exactly where our string is going to attach onto. And it's attached on in this kind of cross shape. It's attached from here and here, here and here, with the string down the middle there. So nice simple design, but we want to make sure it's going to actually work. And if we put it in the wrong place, then what might happen is your puppet's arms are going to go all the way up overhead or something like that. And we want to make sure that it's the right amount of movement. I'm going to do the same thing on my arms. I'm going to make a mark here, and I'm going to make a mark here. And now that I've done that, I'm able to make that hole before we attach these limbs on. So again, going back to my trusty blue tack and my bamboo skewer, I'm going to make a hole where I know that I want to attach the other string on there. There's one. Oh, goodness me. I don't know what's going on with this cardboard. Some of it's made to be invincible. I sincerely hope that all of you at home are not working with invincible cardboard as I am. There we go. Third time lucky. Okay. And the same with the top of the leg there. Make a hole where we've made the mark. I actually think it's because my bamboo skewer is slightly blunt. Let's see if I can sharpen that up by cutting the end off. There we go. Lovely stuff. So now at the top of each limb, you've got two holes. One is to attach onto the body, and the other is for the string to make the movement work, okay? So we're going to make sure that we've got the holes punctured into the body to attach on our arms and our legs. And then we're into the next section, which is going to be how we tie the string together. So I'm going to make sure that I've got the hole in the body made. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to start off by attaching on my arms. So I'm taking a piece of string, and again, I'm going to thread that through the bottom hole. Make sure you're threading your string through the right hole. It should be the lower hole in the arm. And I'm going to knot that either side, just as I did with my leg. Same on the other side there, making sure I'm going through the lower hole with the arm. Tying the knot on either side to ensure it's in place. And trimming the string off so it's nice and neat. So now I've got my arms attached, and we're going to do the same thing on the bottom, okay? Hello. So again, remember that you're making sure that you're attaching the leg on using the bottom of the two holes that you've made. Otherwise you'll have to remove it and start again. Easy mistake to make, but just a little reminder there. You can see now my leg is attached. And now I'm onto the final side, the final leg there. And then this is the final knot. This one on that side and this one on this side. Okay, and now I'm just going to trim that off. And now you can see that I've got my completed frog body, okay? So I'm going to check that that all moves okay, nothing's banging. You can see that I've left enough space here. There's a gap here so that I can attach the string on here and I can attach the string on here, okay? And that brings us on to the next section when we're actually going to attach on our strings. So the next bit is where we want to make sure that our puppet can actually move well. So this takes a little bit of just tweaking there. And I am going to do that by attaching, firstly, a piece of string to the arms of my puppet, okay, here and here. And I'm going to use one long piece of string because what I want to sort of aim for is to tie it on either side and then have a bit that drops down here that will actually end up to be our pulley, okay? And it's like a loop so that your finger can link into it. So I'm going to cut myself a nice long piece of string and I'm going to make sure that it's long enough so that I've got excess really. And I'm now going to use my string and attach it onto the arm, so I'll show you. So I've got my, my frog puppet here. And I'm going to start off by making sure that I can fit my string through this side. So just make sure that I can get through that hole. I'm going to thread my string through like this. And of course, I'm showing you this way so that I can show you a step-by-step way of how to put the puppet together. But of course, if you're making it at home, you could also just attach the string on before you put the arms on. It's just easier for me to show you it in a kind of step-by-step way. So I've got my string through that side and I'm going to do the same on the other side here. And again, if it's quite tricky to get the string through, I just use my bamboo skewer to encourage it a little bit so that you can get some purchase on the other side. There we go. So now you can see how if I allow that string to fall down here like this, I've got a control that means that my puppet should be able to move when I pull the string. So I'm going to tie a knot at the top of the arm there. And I'm making sure that where I'm tying the knot on the puppet is kind of at the top. If you tie it at the bottom, it's going to change the direction of where your arm moves from. So I'm going to try and tie my knot at the top of my toad here. So I'm double knotting this one on both sides, and then I'm going to trim the edges so that I can see exactly what's going on. So I'm trimming off that. You should end up with it looking like this, with a loop here. And you can see that I've kind of got like this strange situation now where if I pull it does move, but it's not controlled. I've not got controlled movement. So what I want to do to control the movement is I'm going to tie a knot in the middle, which means that I've got an even amount of string on either side of the knot. That means that when I pull the string, I'm going to have a controlled movement like this, okay? So I'm going to make sure I take my time with this section. This is where you're going to be making good movement. So do take your time with tying the knot. But I'm just going to pick up my string here, make sure that I've got even string on either side, and then I'm going to tie a knot into the middle like this. And the nice thing about when you're tying knots, you can kind of like manipulate the knot so that if it's not quite looking even, you can start with a loose knot and then pull and tease the string so that it's even either side before tightening it there. And that's a good way to do it on this type of of puppet. There we go. So there we go. I've got my little arms, and I can now see that when I'm pulling it, it's a nice even movement. So the way that we're going to get the legs moving is that now you can see that you've got your piece of string hanging out the bottom here so that you're able to actually control your puppet. So the next thing we want to do is tie a separate piece of string from the top 2 holes onto this one so that it attaches together. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my piece of string, and I'm not going to attach it onto the legs first. I'm actually going to tie it onto that piece of string falling down, because it means that I can see where I'm going to be able to control the legs from. So I'll show you that. I've got my piece of string attached onto my arms. Here's my frog puppet. And I'm going to make sure that when I tie it, that the legs are straight like this, because that's obviously how it will sit when you're allowing it, when it's sat on your wall or whatnot. The legs are going to be down like that. So I'm going to position them to exactly where I want the legs to be first. And I'm going to look at roughly where it falls in line with the string that I've already tied on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that string and I'm going to tie it in a knot. Now, I can trust that all of you guys are very good at tying knots at home. So if you find a way of doing it that's easier for you, then it's absolutely fine. The main thing we're aiming for here is so that we've got a piece of string that's attached on at roughly the right plane as our 2 dots. So you can see I've tied the knot so it's roughly in line with where I put the dots at the top of the legs there, yeah? So it means that if I tie the knot really high, then my legs are probably going to go very, very high when I pull it. And if I tie it too low, then it will fall out of the bottom of the body. So that's what I'm aiming for, okay? So now I've done that, it means that I can take the string that I've just attached on, and it can run either side to the leg like this. So I'm going to make sure that that's in line like this. And I'm pulling the knot at the moment. I'm manipulating the knot because my string's quite thick. So I want to make sure that I'm ending up with a loop at the bottom and the string going out either side. So you want to make sure that your knot hasn't meant that your string's going off at a funny angle, because that might affect how you're going to pull your puppet there. So I'm making sure I'm just taking time. It's probably the bit that takes longest in this whole design, really. And then when I'm happy with that, I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I've done with the arms. I'm going to thread that through the top of each leg, through the hole that we made earlier. And again, I'm going to just manipulate the string to go through the hole using that bamboo skewer, because my string is that sort of garden twine that loves to unravel in a very helpful way. There we go. Okay, so that's one side through. And I'm not tying the knot yet, I'm working one at a time. I've pulled the string through that side, and now I'm going to do the same on the other side. And it means that what I can do is just spend a little bit of time ensuring that my string is in the right place and that the knots are going to be in the right place. It's all about balance, really, with this, because you might actually find that you want your puppet to go in different angles, and that means that you can tie the string slightly differently, and this is where you can have a play. You could almost make a frog that climbs if you want to, but I'm just showing you a very traditional thing where they all move exactly the same way. So here I am, I'm just manipulating that string through there, pulling it through. And here is where we get to have a little bit of a play. So I'm going to see if I can just show you now how it's looking. So I've not tied the knots yet, but this is my opportunity to see if it works. And you can see that you can kind of get an idea. I want to make sure I'm pulling things so that I'm going to get that movement. There we go. We're starting to be able to see how it's working. There we go. So now's when I'm going to play around. You can see this side's not working as well, and that's because I haven't tied the knot. But theoretically, I should be able to create movement easily. So this is where you want to just sit and take a little bit of time, play around with the movement, make sure it's going to work okay. In all honesty, this string isn't the best for using on the back of a puppet because it's quite thick. If you have got something a bit thinner, it's normally a bit easier, sorry. You could even use cotton if that's what you've got at home, if you've got a little sewing kit. It might just be a little bit more delicate. But there we go. So I've had a good look at the puppet at the back there. I've spent a little bit of time and now I can see that when I'm putting it, it's evenly pulling on either side there, okay? And now I'm happy with that. I'm going to tie that off and I'm going to cut it to make sure it's not fussy at the back. The really lovely thing about this is that obviously I'm showing you how to do it in cardboard, but you could play around with doing it in plastic. If you've got a kind of a clear plastic container, you can use that and you could draw on it using some permanent marker. And then you've got a very different texture. All of the techniques in all of these puppet making lessons, you can kind of transfer into other materials quite easily. So we should now end up with something like this, okay? It's like a dissected frog, isn't it? This is the back and you can see that it's evenly tied on both sides, here and here. So now when I pull, my frog is going to move like this, okay? We have got to the stage where we've finished completely the little mechanism. And this is where I get to show you why we've got a candle. So obviously, I wanted to create some kind of warty bits on my toad. And it's kind of hard to do that with anything like tape and stuff. But I do want to show you what I've done. With this one, I've built up some eyes here using some tape, okay? But you can just as easily have 2D eyes. But what we are going to do is I'm going to take my candle now and I'm going to light it. And I'm just going to let that sit there for a minute and it's going to help melt the wax a little bit. So it's just a little tea light. It should only take a couple of seconds. So if you've got your candle at home, do make sure obviously that you're nowhere near fabrics, that you're being really, really careful with the flame and that you're not going to burn yourself. If you do get any wax on you, it does dry quickly, but just make sure you run your hand under a cold tap because we don't want you getting hurt. So I'm going to leave my candle burning just for a second there. And what I want to do is have a look at my toad and I'm going to see about dripping the wax onto the back of the toad to create a kind of texture before I paint it. Making sure that I've not got anything around that could get, you know, wax on it. So if you are working at home on the floor, for example, do be very, very careful if you're working on carpet because wax is a complete nightmare to get out. And as you can see, my wax is starting to pool a little bit at the bottom there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start to tip the candle and explore allowing the wax to drop onto the back of the puppet. You can see that I've got a little globule there. And I'll do the same thing again on camera so that you can see that I'm just literally tipping and allowing the wax to just dot onto the back of the puppet there. And what you get is that really nice random effect like the back of a toad where they've got that really bobbly textured back. Some of you might, if you've got a garden or if you've got access to a green space, there is actually quite a lot of toads around at the moment, funnily enough. So that's where I got the inspiration from. There was one just sat on the path that I walked down the other day. So I'm just dripping that on there and I'm letting it dry very carefully. But you can see now that I've got these globules of wax and they're really, really quite a nice texture to play around with. And you can do that all over. I might put a couple on the legs here as well. Very carefully. And I'm doing it up so the camera so you can see, but obviously the best way to do this is just to be very careful and do it nice and flat on the table. And once you're happy with the texture that you've got for your frog, make sure you blow your candle out and leave that somewhere safe to cool down. But you just want to leave it for a couple of minutes to cool. And then you're basically ready to give your frog a paint. In order to get the texture that I've achieved on this puppet, what I've done is given it a base coat of a lighter colour. So I used a yellow ochre, which is one of my favourites. And then what I did is using a dry brush technique, which I'm going to show you on a separate piece of card. You can really work in and get some nice texture onto the back of your frog. And then I highlighted these wax globules here with a darker colour so it stands out nice and evenly. And then I use something that's slightly iridescent just to make it look like it's wet, basically. So I'll just do a little bit of that today, and I'll start to work into the beginning of the toad. I'm going to take my yellow paint, and I'm going to work into the back of my toad. This is where you can start to really see the texture that you've created using those wax drops. And I'll just do the body for now. But you want to make sure you've got a nice even covering. You can see that my box has got some patterning on it. So I want to make sure you don't see any of that. And then I'm going to take some of my green paint. I've done a traditional green toad, but I've been looking into toads and it's amazing, really. You can get them in all different colours. So you can get creative with this. Maybe you even want to do a bit of a psychedelic toad. And I'm going to mix my green and my yellow together to get a nice lighter colour. And I'm going to start working into the side here. And I'm thinking a little bit about shading. I'm not the most amazing painter in the world, just to give you a heads up there. So if you're looking at this with horror, know that actually having a bit of an experiment is quite fun with this. But I'm highlighting the corners of the puppet like that. And what you would normally do with regard to dry brushing is that you, once you've mixed up your paint like this, I'll show you just on the palette here, you want to get as much of it off as possible, and then you're pulling the texture through. So you're not using great dobs of paint like that because it's very, very wet. You're trying to get as much of the paint off as possible and pull it through. And what you can see then is you can sort of see that you get smeary effects with your paint. And it's quite a nice thing to play around with when you're texturizing something like a toad or something with lots of texture in the skin, because it means that you can actually have a look and see about, you know, providing those kind of really detailed colors. So I'm working into the corner of my puppet there, and obviously this will not dry in time for me to fully show you, but you can start to get the idea of where I'm going. I then use my hand to just go over the top of those wax bits and pick up the detail of those wax drops like this, just using a finger. And then what you can do is really like work it into the wax, and the wax actually absorbs the paint quite nicely. And you can start to see how just through using that, I'm using a darker paint to bring out the texture so it looks more 3D. So you can start to see how if I worked into that more and more and more, you end up with something with a lot more detail and a lot more texture, and you end up with something that's a lot more froggy. And the very, very last thing you want to do is to put an attachment point into the head here with a piece of string, or you can even just pin it up somewhere so that then you're able to pop your toad somewhere and you can see the movement there like this. We've come to the end of today. So that is our jumping jack inspired toad puppet, which you can hang up on the wall and move really lovely. Thank you so much for joining me again today. I hope you've enjoyed it.